They left me in the cemetery like a piece of trash. Not even the decency of a proper burial, just my body dumped beside a forgotten grave under the moonless sky. I remember the cold dampness of the earth seeping into my skin, the taste of blood on my tongue, and the last thing I heard before the car drove away. Let the worms handle him now. My own son's voice. The same boy I raised, fed, protected, had just thrown me out like yesterday's waste. My name is Albert Reyes. I'm 67 years old. 3 months ago, doctors told me the cancer in my lungs had spread too far. They gave me 6 months, maybe less. I didn't care about dying. What hurt more was realizing I'd spent my life building a family. That would choose to bury me alive. I still don't know exactly how I got there. One moment I was in my wheelchair watching the rain trickle down the living room window. The next I was choking on dirt, my face smashed against a cracked tombstone. The bastards must have drugged me. Maybe in my coffee. The thought makes me sick now. My legs were too weak to move and my arms trembled when I tried to push myself up. But I was alive. That alone was something they hadn't expected. The cemetery was abandoned, just patches of brittle grass and crooked stones. No lights. Just a thick fog that seemed to whisper every time the wind blew. I remember lying there thinking about my wife Lydia. She'd passed 6 years ago. And how I used to bring her here, yes, here of all places. She wanted to be buried where her parents were. I agreed, never thinking I'd end up here myself, not like this. I coughed, blood spilling out of my mouth, staining the ground. That's when I saw something or someone move behind a broken statue. A figure tall, cloaked in dark clothing, just watching me. I thought I was hallucinating, but then he stepped closer, silent, and knelt beside me. His hand was rough but gentle as he helped lift my head. He didn't say a word, just looked into my eyes as if he already knew who I was. "Who are you?" I whispered. He didn't answer. Instead, he slipped a flask from his coat and held it to my lips. The liquid burned, but it jolted something inside me awake. I started to breathe easier. My heart stopped skipping. Then he finally spoke, and his voice sent a chill through me. "They didn't bury you deep enough, Albert." I froze. He knew my name. Who are you?" I rasped again, struggling to keep my head up. The stranger didn't respond immediately. He slipped the flask back into his coat and glanced around the cemetery as if expecting someone or something to appear. Then he looked back at me, his voice like gravel soaked in regret. "I'm someone who's been waiting a long time to see you crawl out of that grave." He stood, took a slow breath, and extended his hand. "You can call me Elias." I didn't know whether to trust him. But the pain in my body gave me no choice. I reached out, and with great effort, he pulled me to my feet, or rather onto one foot. My right leg was stiff and numb, my arms barely had strength. I was little more than a breathing corpse. He helped me hobble through the fog, toward an old iron gate at the edge of the cemetery. Every step I took, flashes of memory stabbed into my mind, my son, Derek's face twisted with fury, my daughter-in-law sobbing dramatically, the fight at the dinner table, the whispering in the hall, the unsigned will I'd left in the drawer. God, that was it. "I didn't sign the papers," I muttered aloud. Elias stopped. "What papers?" "The will," I said, coughing violently. "They wanted me to give everything to Derek. I told them I needed more time. They must have thought if I was gone. They'd inherit it all," Elias finished grimly. "Greed makes monsters out of blood." We passed a cracked mausoleum with ivy growing from its roof. I leaned against it, catching my breath. Elias stood nearby, watching me as if I were a ghost returned. There was something strange in his eyes, familiarity, but not quite comfort. Like he knew more than he let on. "You said you were waiting for me," I croaked. "Why?" He turned away briefly. "Because your pain is connected to mine." That sentence haunted me for the rest of the night. We made it to a shack just outside the cemetery, hidden behind thorny bushes and a rusted fence. Inside there was a small cot, a lantern, and a fireplace that hadn't seen flame in years. Elias lit it quickly, the warmth seeping into my frozen skin. He sat across from me and stared into the fire. "They tried to bury you with their secrets," he said quietly. "But the dead, they have a way of digging their way out." I looked at him closely, his shadow flickering across the wall. "You knew my family." He nodded once. Who are you to them?" He finally met my eyes. And what he said next sent a chill deeper than the cemetery's cold earth. "I was your wife's brother Albert, the one they said died in a fire." My heart skipped a beat, because that fire was no accident. The fire. My mind reeled. "That was 25 years ago," I whispered. "Lydia's brother James." They said I burned to death in the cabin," Elias said, staring into the fire again. "But I didn't. They wanted me dead. Just like they want you gone now." My throat went dry. I remembered the night clearly. Lydia's family had been feuding for years, inheritance land pride. James was the black sheep, the rebellious younger brother who rejected the family's wealth and secrets. Then one night the cabin he was staying in mysteriously caught fire. They said it was an accident. Lydia cried for weeks. "But you, how did you survive?" "I wasn't supposed to be there that night," he said. "Someone tipped me off. I watched the flames from a distance, and I knew they'd do anything to keep what was theirs. So I disappeared." I stared at him, disbelief warring with guilt. "Why didn't you come back? Why not tell Lydia you were alive?" He didn't answer right away. "Because by the time I returned, she had married you, and I saw how happy she was. I couldn't ruin that. But I watched from afar. I stayed close, especially after she got sick." Suddenly everything inside me twisted. "So all those flowers at her grave, the ones I thought came from a stranger," he nodded. "They were from me." I sat in silence, tears threatening to rise, but too dried by years of hurt. The fog outside the shack thickened, pressing against the windows. My mind couldn't make sense of the path that had led me here, abandoned by my son, rescued by a man I thought long dead, and discovering secrets buried deeper than the graves behind us. Elias stood and reached into a drawer, pulling out a faded leather folder. "This," he said, handing it to me, "is why they tried to kill you." Inside was a copy of my wife Lydia's original will, one I never knew existed. Her signature, her handwriting, and the name of the sole beneficiary, Claire, our granddaughter. Not Derek. Not the greedy snake who tried to murder me. She wanted Claire to inherit the house, the land, the savings. Everything. She said Derek was too much like his uncle's, cold calculating. But he found out. And he buried the truth. I looked at Elias, numb with horror. He buried it, and tried to bury me too. We sat in silence as the truth sank in. The betrayal was deeper than I imagined. It wasn't just greed, it was legacy. Erased, rewritten, stolen. Elias poured more of that bitter liquid into a tin cup and handed it to me. "You ready, Albert?" "For what?" He smiled faintly, the firelight catching the scar on his jaw I'd never noticed before. "To go back and show them the dead don't stay dead forever." I nodded, my blood boiling now. It was time for resurrection. We waited until midnight. Elias helped me into a clean shirt, a dark coat, and a worn-out hat that shadowed most of my face. I looked in the cracked mirror on the wall and barely recognized myself. Pale, bruised, eyes sunken, cheeks hollow. But in those eyes there was fire. The walk back to the city took hours. We avoided the main roads. Elias had connections he arranged for an old truck to pick us up on a remote trail. The driver never spoke a word, just glanced at me once in the rearview mirror and nodded to Elias as if confirming I was still breathing. We didn't go home. Not yet. Elias took me to a ruined chapel on a hill just outside town. The stained glass windows were broken. The pews rotted, the altar overgrown with vines. But beneath the dust and ruin, I saw something familiar. This was Lydia's childhood church. He led me to the back into a side chamber. A table was set. Candles burned low. There were papers spread out, photocopies, photos, letters, and a tape recorder. And a comb. What is all this? I asked, lowering myself into a chair. Evidence, Elias said. Everything they didn't want you to see. He handed me a stack of papers. At the top, real estate transfer proposal. Derek's name was all over it. They planned to sell everything, Elias said bitterly. The house, the land, even Lydia's jewelry. It was never about grief. It was about flipping your legacy for profit. They even hired a lawyer to backdate documents, make it look like you gave consent. I flipped through another file. Security camera footage. Elias had photos of Derek meeting with a man in a suit, Lydia's old lawyer. That's the man who told me I didn't need to worry about wills, I muttered. Said Lydia's wishes were already handled. Elias leaned forward, his voice low. And he's the same man who notarized the false documents declaring you mentally unfit. I stared at him. So Derek was preparing to declare me incompetent, Elias nodded. And when you hesitated to sign the new will, he panicked. Everything clicked. The coffee, the dizziness, the slurred speech. I wasn't just getting sicker, he had drugged me, then dumped me in the cemetery, hoping the cancer would finish the job, or the cold would take me. But I hadn't died. I gripped the edge of the table. So what now? Elias lit another candle. We show them you're alive. But more than that, we show them the truth. Tomorrow's the memorial service, isn't it? Yes. He handed me a small envelope. Then this is what you'll deliver. Inside was a memory card and a note with 3 words written in Lydia's handwriting. Give this to Claire. I held the envelope against my chest and took a deep breath. The air in the chapel felt heavy, sacred. I will, I said. And after that, they'll wish they had buried me deeper. Elias smiled, but his eyes didn't. They'll wish a lot more than that, Albert. The sky wept the morning of my memorial. Rain tapped softly on the chapel windows as Elias helped me dress in an old black suit he'd preserved for years. Lydia's brother still guarding her memory. The fog hadn't lifted. In fact, it thickened as if the world itself knew what was coming. We arrived at the church just minutes before the service began. I stayed hidden in the back, seated in the shadows behind a curtain near the choir loft. From there, I could see them all. Derek stood at the front wearing a perfectly solemn expression. Black tie, slicked back hair, polished shoes. The image of a grieving son liar. He placed a hand on the urn resting on the altar. There was no body inside, just ashes scraped from a fireplace. Claire sat in the front pew, hands folded tightly in her lap. She was only 17, Lydia's favorite, and the only one who ever visited me without asking for money. Her eyes were red, swollen from crying. I couldn't stand to see her like that. The pastor began speaking, but I didn't hear the words. I watched the faces. My daughter-in-law pretending to dab tears. The lawyer seated discreetly 3 rows behind. A sea of black clothes and white lies. Then Elias slipped beside me and whispered, "Ready?" I nodded, clenching the envelope in my hand. It was time. He moved first. Calmly, deliberately, he walked down the aisle, heads turning in confusion as this unknown man approached the altar. Derek looked annoyed. "Excuse me, can we help you?" Elias ignored him. He stopped in front of Claire and handed her the envelope. "Your grandmother wanted you to have this." Claire looked confused. "Who are you?" Elias smiled faintly. "A friend of the dead." Derek stood sharply. "Security." That was my cue. I stepped out of the shadows. Gasps filled the room like thunder. Claire dropped the envelope. Derek's face drained of color. My daughter-in-law whispered, "It can't be." The lawyer backed toward the door. I limped slowly, one hand on my cane, the other pointing at Derek. "I told you," I said, voice raspy but firm. "You should have buried me deeper." Screams erupted. A woman fainted. Someone dropped a phone. Claire ran to me, tears spilling. "Grandpa, Grandpa, you're alive!" I hugged her with trembling arms. Derek stepped back, shaking his head. "This isn't real. He's dead. This is a trick." Elias stepped beside me. "No trick," he said calmly. "Just resurrection." Claire knelt and picked up the envelope, pulling out the memory card and the note. The pastor plugged it into the church's projector. Footage lit up the wall. Derek at the lawyer's office, him signing forged documents, pouring powder into my drink. And finally, his voice on tape. If the old man dies now, we don't wait a year for the will. It's ours. The silence afterward was louder than any scream. And then, the police arrived. Derek didn't speak a word as they cuffed him. His mouth hung open, eyes darting between me and the screen, playing his betrayal over and over. The entire church watched in stunned silence as the officers read him his rights. My daughter-in-law tried to run, but Elias blocked the aisle with his cane. "You're not leaving," he told her coldly. "Not until he's in the car." Claire stood beside me, holding my hand, tears still streaking her cheeks. But this time they weren't from grief. They were relief, hope, justice. The lawyer tried to slip away quietly, but one of the detectives stopped him. "You're coming too, Mr. Grant." Outside, the rain fell harder. As they dragged Derek past me, he turned his face twisted in rage and shame. "You ruined everything." "No," I said, locking eyes with him. "You did. When you decided money was worth more than blood." He spat near my feet before being forced into the cruiser. Elias and I remained until the church emptied. The pastor stood awkwardly in the back, unsure whether to bless me or call an exorcist. I didn't care. I looked at Claire. "I'm sorry you had to see that," I said. She shook her head. "I needed to." I handed her the folder Elias had shown me at the chapel, the true will. Lydia's wishes, proof of every lie. She deserved to know. And she deserved a future free from them. "Your grandmother wanted you to have everything. And now, you will." She hugged me tightly, whispering, "Thank you for coming back." Later at the cemetery, I stood beside Lydia's grave, cane in hand, Elias by my side. The fog had lifted. The sky was bruised, but no longer bleeding. "I never thought I'd stand here again," I said. Elias placed a flower on the stone. "You came back from the grave to finish what she started." "Will you stay?" I asked him. He smiled. "I've lived in the shadows long enough. Maybe now I can live in peace." Claire joined us with the quiet smile, her hand tucked in mine. I turned toward Lydia's grave and whispered, "They tried to bury me, love, but I wasn't ready to rest." I closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of dying, because I had already come back from the dead. If my story teaches you anything, let it be this: blood can lie and love can hide. But truth, it always claws its way to the surface, even from beneath dirt and betrayal. I gave my life to a family that turned its back on me. Yet I was saved not by those I raised, but by a forgotten brother and a granddaughter with her grandmother's heart. If you feel discarded, silenced, or buried by those closest to you, fight to breathe. Because the ones who think you're gone may one day tremble when you rise. And when you do, bring the truth with you.